Okay, good evening, everyone, and good to see you again. Another of our events, this one focusing particularly on COVID. So what I'm proposing to do is about 15 minutes worth of presentation. I'll share my screen in a minute, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So stay alert, control the virus, and save lives. And I was reading just this week actually from JAMA, which is probably one of the world's leading health publications, and they've done a fantastic summary of what's gone on with coronavirus, etc. And I'll talk you through a little bit of it without being too technical, I hope. So it all begins, doesn't it, on in late December when the Chinese alerted the World Health Organizations about an unknown virus that started in Wuhan province. And as you can see, it's from there, it's spread throughout the world, and it shows in this graph the number of confirmed cases. Now, obviously, we're seeing huge numbers of increased confirmation of cases, but bear in mind, we're doing a lot more testing than we were, so don't get too concerned about that. But you can see the spread across the world, and we're hearing terrible things this evening from South Africa. So it started in early December 19 officially, but actually I'm fairly convinced that it started a lot sooner than that. And they've recently found, I think, some sewage in Italy with COVID virus in from March of last year. So we all think this is the first wave, and we're worried about a second wave. I actually suspect the first wave was at some point in 2019, just like the Spanish flu, and it came back, and actually what we've just experienced is the second wave. And in between the first and the second waves, the virus mutated and became a lot more lethal. So this is an explanation of how the virus enters the cell. And those beautiful spikes on the side of the virus are the ways that the virus enters the cell. And those spikes confuse a cell by entering a cell, and it's the ACE2 receptors on cells that the virus is the point of entry. Remember, if the virus doesn't get inside the cell, it can't do anything. And a virus is a bit like a Trojan horse, really. It sneaks its way into a cell, and it takes control of the cell, uses the cell mechanisms to assemble itself into more viruses, then breaks out the cell and rinse and repeat. And that's what you can see here. And initially, this was thought to be a standard respiratory virus, where the virus would infect the pneumocyte, which is the little bit of the cell, you know, little alveolar air sacs in the cell, and it would infect that, it particularly infected the parts of the alveoli, that the pneumocytes, which generate the surfactant, which keep the alveolus open, and therefore that was what was going to cause the lungs to become impossible to inflate, and we would force them to inflate with respirators. And in fact, as time has gone on, we've realised it's a lot more complicated than that, and actually it seems to infect the endothelium as well. So initially, you've got small numbers of the virus, and then they grow and grow and grow and burst their way out of the cell. And where you get respiratory distress is this mechanism here. And this is an illustration of the endothelium, the lining of your arteries. And you can see those tiny little hair-like substances, which are little sugar spikes. Actually, they're made primarily of sugar, permeating into the blood vessel. So that's the absolute inside of the inside wall of your arteries. And if that area gets damaged, then bad stuff can happen, and things can get into the arterial wall and cause damage. And this is where we think the damage happens in the endothelium. So the virus gets through this little hair-like structure and does damage in the endothelium, the lining of the arteries. And this shows, it's a CT scan of a man of 76. And initially, you can see what they call this subpleural in the lungs, this ground glass opacity. So it's just the way that the lungs look. And eventually you get consolidation. So you get real damage to the lungs. And over time, the damage gets more and more diffuse in the lungs, and the lungs stop working, basically. And here we illustrate deaths from COVID by age groups. And as you can see, under 18, very unlikely to cause a problem unless you've got a very severely ill 18-year-old who's severely compromised. And the risk of death, as you can see, in an 18-year-old, it's less than 1 per 1,000 cases. In an over 85-year-old, it's 300, over 300. So we know the biggest risk factor for dying of COVID or having severe COVID outcome is age, as is with all illnesses. But actually, there's a little bit more to it than that. And it says, and I'll just read out a little bit of the summary of what the JAMA publication says. And one of the points is because lots of different countries have implemented multiple infection measures, it's difficult to determine the relative benefit of each. And here we have it. The underlying evidence of these public health interventions has not changed since the 1918 flu epidemic. So we've got mathematical models and all this sophistication, but we're still in many ways basing what we're doing on what happened in the 1918 flu. Now, there's been a massive controversy about this thing called herd immunity and whether we develop antibodies. And this is a really fundamental point, and it really is the major point I want to dwell on this evening. We all hear about the adaptive immune system, and that's the ability to generate very specific antibodies. I'm just going to see if I can let a couple more people into the room. Excuse me one sec. Right, one moment. Right. Yeah, we're all good. Fine. So we all hear about the immune system, and all we really hear talked about is the adaptive immune system. And actually, the immune system is multi-layered. And the first part of the immune system is the mucosal lining. So the virus has got to get into the cell, and in order to get into the cell, it's got to find its way into the right direction. So the two areas where it comes in are the mucosal linings of the respiratory tract, the lungs, and the gut. And if you've got a very strong mucosal lining that's healthy in your gut and in your respiratory tract, then the virus, maybe you breathe it in or maybe you swallow it, but it can't actually get any further than that, and it will just pass through. And so a significant percentage of people, they actually get the virus, but they never get the infection, and they'll never show any immunity because actually the virus has simply passed through the system. And if you've got a healthy immune system and a healthy mucosal lining, then you can resist really well. And so if you're a ProLongevity client, you'll know I focus very much on the microbiome, and the microbiome is what maintains your healthy immunity, and particularly the microbiome maintains the gut barrier and the gut lining and all of that. So if you're type 2 diabetic, you're inflamed, you've got a damaged microbiome, you're far more susceptible. So so the first barrier is literally, as I say, it's the mucus and the lining of the gut and the respiratory tract. And then you've got the old innate immune system. And this is fascinating stuff. Every single cell expresses on its external surface little bits of protein that the cell's producing internally. And the way that we recognize self against something that's non-self is this expression of proteins produced in the cells. So it's a bit like you've got factories, every cell's a factory, and it's designed to produce good stuff, and you've got the police policing it, and every so often they take a look at what the cell is producing, and so long as it's healthy proteins and it's good stuff, all is well. But if the cells start producing foreign stuff, Debbie, can I ask you to mute yourself?
Sorry, thank you.
If if the cells are not producing the things that they're supposed to, then the innate system comes along, spots that, and shuts the cells down, and they literally kill themselves. So that's the second part of immunity, the innate immune system. Again, if you're healthy, if you've got a good balanced diet, and if you're getting plenty of sleep, you have a strong innate immune system, you will be untroubled by the virus. Then we have these things called T cells, right? And a lot of T cells, remember, this is a coronavirus, and we are dealing with coronaviruses the whole time. They're very normal. Lots of colds are themselves coronaviruses. So we're pretty used to having coronaviruses. And many of the proteins in COVID are shared with many other coronaviruses. So although we're saying it's a novel virus and we've never come across it before, we've come across many of the protein segments of coronaviruses. So if you've recovered from a cold or a similar coronavirus infection previously, you have cell memory. And if that being the case, you can probably resist the coronavirus through the innate immune system, not the adaptive immune system, and that will kill the virus off or stop you getting a bad dose, or you'll get minor symptoms without having to induce the active immune system, right? Then finally, we have the active immune system, the adaptive immune system, and again, that is your sort of last pathway to preventing the infection and to killing the infection off. But not necessarily will everyone who's even induced that have a significant antibody titer. So you'll get a false negative. And then the last aspect of it is obviously the tests themselves aren't 100% accurate, not because they're inaccurate tests, but unless you get a significant antibody titer and you swab in the right way, will you get the result? So what am I saying? What I'm saying is, we're obsessed with testing, and actually the testing doesn't tell you very much. But what I think I can say is this. This is just to show you the complexity of the innate immune system, which hasn't even been discussed. We reckon the excess deaths due to coronavirus this year might be 60,000 people. And it's widely believed now that the case fatality rate and number of percent, in other words, the number of people who get killed by the virus, is about 0.5%. That means that if 60,000 people have died, 12 million people have had the infection. 12 million. And 12 million people haven't been very, very ill, have they? So the vast majority of people don't even know they've had it, and it just passes through because they've got strong mucosal lining and a strong innate immune system. This is very interesting. This is Euromomo data, and this is the data of all-cause mortality from, and it compares 2020 and 2018. And what's the point I'm trying to make here? So in the 2017-2018 period of flu, we had about 120,000 excess deaths. And that's a fairly normal flu year. No one shuts the economy down. And this last period, up to date, we've had about 158,000 excess deaths, right? Mainly in people over 65. And you can see the difference is it's like a fairly severe flu season plus 20%. Why don't we shut the entire world's economy down every time we have flu? Because the difference really isn't very much. And there's more to it. And this is a slide I've borrowed from Ivor Cummins, and I highly recommend following Ivor Cummins. And what he's been able to show is statistically and practically, the benefit of shutdown on top of all the other benefits is very small. And I take you back to my first slide, or my second or third slide, where they said we're basically doing the same as 2018. Lots of countries have done lots of different measures, and it's by no means clear that the different measures from the different countries, what has made an incremental difference. What you can do, though, and you know, that original study, I think it was from UCL, it might not have been UCL, which showed we were going to have like 200,000 excess deaths, and it's widely believed now that isn't the case, and they massively over-egged the pudding. Everyone panicked, the politicians panicked, we shut the economy down. We shut it down too late, actually, because the virus had already gone crazy. And there's lots of studies now that if you compare, for example, different countries when they've shut down, whether they've shut down, and even different states in America, like in New York, they did very little and they did it very late. There are states in New York, in America, where they locked down very quickly, very thoroughly, very early. Guess what? It's shown absolutely no benefit at all. You can actually see the curve come up and down like these infections already do, and there's almost no difference between them. And this is the acquired immunity I was talking about, where you have the B cells triggered. It finds an antigen, which is the antigen, as I said, expressed on the cells where the viruses attack the cells, and then it brings its mates along and kills and engulfs the cells. So it's a very complex process that goes on here. So who is at risk of infection and severe mortality from COVID? Men are more likely to die than women. Why is that? They've got more ACE receptor. And as I said, the ACE receptor is the point of entry into the cell. Lifestyle, smoking, alcohol, diet, physical activity, high levels of deprivation, we know, age I've talked about, and obesity has been discussed a lot because of particularly Boris, who was 17.5 stone and thought he could outrun a bad diet, etc., etc. Vitamin D, a very big thing here. So vitamin D, we call it a vitamin, but actually I might do a complete broadcast on this. Vitamin D isn't a vitamin, it's a hormone. It's of fundamental importance. Yes, there are levels of genetic susceptibility, but those aren't the major drivers. The major driver basically is this: whether you've got metabolic syndrome, so that's diabetes, pre-diabetes, and all the associated type 2. And that is what the whole of my ProLongevity program is designed to help. So if you go back to the World Health Organization, they talked about what? They talked about the causes, they talked about the innate system, they talked about the secondary immune system, and then what do they talk about? They talk about social distancing measures, and they talk about drugs and vaccinations. What do they not talk about? They don't talk about our own immunity at all, and they don't discuss how we can benefit our own immunity, and yet this is by far the most important point. And the entire medical system is missing all of this. We immediately go for drugs, and injections and treatment, and we don't think, what can we do for ourselves? And the rest of what I'm going to focus on has been exactly that. So here we are. I believe that the whole of Western society has been poisoned by the food industry, telling us that a calorie is a calorie. No, it isn't. The nature of the calories matter. The bad calories are going to make you sick and inflamed, and guess what? Vulnerable to coronavirus. And what does the pharma company do? It comes along and says, spend all these billions of pounds. The UK drugs bill, I think, is 20 billion now, and it'll make you 10% better. And no one's focusing about preventive health. Which brings me to sleep. Fascinating to know this. If you were poorly slept, as distinct from well slept, the day before a flu jab, it halves or doubles its effectiveness, right? Just one night of good sleep against one night of bad sleep has a whole effect on your entire immune system, right? Why is that? Because your T cells and the whole immune system is incredibly sleep dependent. And you'll know, all my clients will know this, I really focus on sleep and quality of sleep, architecture of sleep, and getting sufficient sleep, because sufficient sleep will put you in very good stead in terms of your immunity and your general health. And I've illustrated it here. So poor, if your sleep is poor, your adaptive immunity is less, your ability to respond to a vaccine, of course, including the COVID vaccine when it comes, will be less. That's with acute sleep deprivation, 1 or 2 bad nights. Chronic sleep deprivation massively increased your inflammation. And the last thing you need when you're going to try and resist an infection that causes inflammation is to be chronically inflamed before you start. And these interleukins, TNF, etc., I'm not going to go into the detail here, but these are inflammatory markers, and inflammation is very important to resist an infection. What you don't want to be is chronically, permanently inflamed, and poor sleep, that is what it leads to, and that damages your immune system. I think I'll move on from there. And this is just another way of illustrating the whole thing, the different stages of sleep, how it affects the brain, how that in turn affects both the immune system and the hormonal systems. And all of this makes you more prone to cardiovascular disease and cancer. And of course, if you're compromised in this way, more prone to COVID. And here we see an illustration of the endothelial cells. If you remember, I showed an electron microscope slide earlier on. So if you've got low vascular permeability, in other words, you've got a very high quality lining of the endothelium of your arteries, then you've got a fantastic barrier to the COVID infection. It can't get in and it will just pass through. But if you get damaged, leaky endothelium, then then there's a much higher risk of attack. And I'm convinced that we will ultimately show that elderly people who are fundamentally very healthy do pretty well, and the vulnerable elderly people are those who are compromised, who've already got damaged poor mucosal lining, damaged endothelial, they're already hypertensive, and the rest of it, and they're the ones who do really well. And the point is that you can do something for yourself here, and you can have massive benefits. 2 or 3 weeks, literally, of better sleep and better diet has a massive effect on your immune system, and you have a massive reduction in your levels of inflammation. And here we are, processed food doing its absolute best. And you've seen me talk about this one before. Here's Greggs with their healthy vegan sausage roll, which has doubled their profit. And look what it's made of. It's full of processed food, seed oils, and rapeseed. And it's, as I've said previously, a vegan sausage roll is actually more unhealthy than a sausage roll. And yet we're all being hoodwinked by the industry to believe this stuff is healthy and good for us. It absolutely isn't. And I talked last time, and you can review this, it's on the website now, about the damage that's done by seed oils generally. And pretty much every single restaurant cooks with seed oils. Think about your local chippy. They use seed oils, and these seed oils are inherently unstable because they're unsaturated. Every time you heat them up, they get oxidized, reheat, more oxidation. Just think about the chippy. They're continually reheating the oil. That oil is going to get more and more oxidized. Those oxidized oils, when you consume them, they are bad for your immune system. They're carcinogenic. They're incredibly bad news, and we need to think deeply about that. And just remember, as I've said previously, we believe that all these things are healthy. We've been sold that they're healthy, and it wasn't, what, 50, 60 years ago. More doctors smoked Camels than any other cigarette. It's just the same as this. And here we are, the advertising, which I talked about previously for Crisco, highly processed. And again, look at my last video, we covered all of this. And in the meantime, we've been deliberately frightened away from eggs and healthy natural food by the food industry. Why? Because they make their money out of the processed foods. And here we are, healthy societies, and they've examined some of these societies. They've taken 1,000 or 2,000 people and actually done very detailed investigations on them. All of these individuals, all these very different societies, very different genetic makeups, they have one thing in common: they eat tons of saturated fat, and they've got no cardiovascular disease, no diabetes. And here we can see the number of coronavirus deaths ranked by soybean consumption. And you can see there's I know this is correlation and may not be causation, but you can see countries that have a lot of seed oils, guess what? They've got a lot of COVID. And this is another illustration. So I illustrated earlier on the endothelial lining of the artery. Here I'm actually illustrating the lining of the gut, because I want to make the point that the principle is the same. If you've got nice tight junctions between the cells, the microorganisms that you swallow can't get into the cells and can't do damage. And that, of course, includes our friend the coronavirus. If you've got damage between the cells and you've got leaky gaps between the cells, or the cells themselves are broken down, two things happen. One is that your ability to absorb micronutrients in food is less. And B, guess what? This guy gets into here and starts up a whole load of inflammatory processes. Not good. And here again, I've illustrated, I'm not going to talk about this in detail this evening, a prudent, healthy diet, a sort of, as I would call it, a modified Mediterranean diet against the standard westernized diet. And guess what? The difference is healthy immune system, healthy mucus, healthy lining of the gut and the respiratory tract against damage and inflammation on the right-hand side, and it's a gift to coronavirus. And guess what's driving it? Yes, this lot. So, in conclusion, plenty of sleep, look after your microbiome, supplement vitamin D, avoid seed oils, be very careful about fructose, the fruit sugar, and carbs, and take plenty of exercise. And for those of us who stay with me to the end, we've got a little mystery guest appearance this evening. I've been hoping he'll turn up, and let's just see if he's made it. Oh yes, here he is.
I'm Captain Carbohydrate, your no-carb commander. It's time to get healthy and drop those unwanted pounds. I'm gonna turn you into a lean, mean, carb-free machine. It's simple. Carbohydrates bad. Protein's good. Now drop and give me 20. 1, 2, 3, 4. You will not eat bread no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Eliminate carbs and lose some weight. No more potato chips, no more soda pop, and say goodbye to donuts, pancakes, and muffins too. Sugar is a weapon of mass destruction, a WMD. Quit your belly aching. If it was easy, everybody'd be as purty as me. Left, right, left. Bread, potatoes, pasta, and wine. Fill your belly like a swine. Left, right, left. When you're hungry and want to eat, salad and meat make a tasty treat.
Thank you very much, Captain Carbohydrate, for your input. And now I'm happy to take any questions, either in the chat or if you flag up any that you want to speak, then we can do that as well.